If you've ever believed your past was behind you, buried, forgotten, irrelevant, let me warn you now, the past doesn't stay buried, especially when it has your eyes. My name is Malik Carrington. I built a billion-dollar tech empire from the ground up. I've spoken at Davos, shaken hands with presidents, donated millions to causes that claim to heal the world. But none of that prepared me for what I saw under that bridge. This story isn't about money. It's about a child and a secret that shattered everything I thought I knew about who I was and who I failed to be. So stay with me, because the moment that changed my life forever didn't happen in a boardroom. It happened in the mud, beneath the shadow of an overpass, beside a girl everyone else had already given up on. It had just stopped raining when I saw her. The air was thick with engine smoke and rot, leftover grease, wet cardboard, the kind of filth that clings to your lungs long after you leave. I'd taken a wrong turn on purpose, I think. My driver had been sent home. I needed space, needed silence. Danielle, my wife, had called twice. I didn't answer. We'd been distant for months, ever since the last IVF cycle failed. Our house was quiet, too quiet. No laughter, no cries, just rooms that echoed and dreams that kept dying. I was driving without a destination, without a plan. And then I saw her. She was curled up beside a trash heap, bare feet tucked under her, soaked to the bone. A little black girl, maybe 10 years old, wearing what looked like hand-woven scraps. Her skin was slick with rain, hair plastered across her face, but her eyes, they weren't the eyes of a child. They were ancient, silent, watching the world the way someone watches a storm they've already survived too many times. I pulled over, stepped out into the muck, not caring that my suit cost more than what most people make in a month. The bottoms of my pants turned brown, my shirt stuck to my chest. I walked toward her slowly, hands raised like I was approaching something holy. "Hey," I said gently, "it's okay, I'm not here to hurt you." She flinched, shrunk deeper into herself. I knelt in the mud beside her. "My name is Malik," I said. "What's yours?" Silence, a long beat, then, barely above a whisper, "Nova, Nova Ellis, Nova." A name like hope, a name like a beginning. "Where are your parents, Nova?" I asked. "They died," she said, voice cracking, "in a fire 2 years ago." Her lips quivered. "People said I caused it, that I brought the flames. They said I was cursed, a witch." She said it like she believed it. She pointed toward a collapsed fruit stall. "I sleep there, behind it. Sometimes I get food from the bins. Sometimes people throw bread at me." My throat tightened. Before I could say more, a woman with an umbrella paused nearby. She eyed me warily, then looked at Nova. "You shouldn't touch that girl," the woman said. "She's dangerous. Bad things happen where she goes. We've all seen it." "She's a child," I snapped, "a cursed one," she muttered, and walked away. I looked back at Nova. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just stared. Like she was used to being left behind. Like she'd already accepted it. And something inside me broke. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I wasn't walking away. I bent down and lifted her into my arms. She was light as air and stiff as stone. She didn't speak, didn't resist, just stared over my shoulder, like this was a dream she didn't trust. I placed her gently into the back seat of my car, turned the heat on full blast, covered her with my jacket. Then I drove, past downtown, past midtown, straight to my clinic, the one I'd built for kids I thought needed saving. I didn't call Danielle. I didn't think about PR. I didn't care what anyone would say. All I knew was I'd found something, or someone, I wasn't supposed to lose. And for reasons I couldn't explain then, I felt like I'd been given a second chance I didn't deserve. The rain followed us home that night. Even after I carried Nova into the Midtown Medical Foundation and watched nurses rush toward us, Even after she was wrapped in warm blankets and examined under soft fluorescent lights, the storm inside me didn't lift. I stayed in the hallway, drenched and shivering, not from the cold, but from the weight of something I didn't have a name for yet. I stared at the phone in my hand. Danielle had called again, 3 times. I didn't pick up. How could I explain to her that I'd just brought home a child, someone else's child, a girl from under a bridge? How could I ask her to open her heart again after it had been shattered so many times? 12 years of empty cribs, of hormones, blood draws, tears muffled behind bathroom doors. 12 years of watching the strongest woman I know fall apart month after month, each time a pregnancy test came back negative. Each time we buried another hope in silence. And now, I had walked into our lives carrying something she had given up on. A child, a little girl with hollow cheeks and haunted eyes, sleeping now just one hallway away. What the hell was I doing? A nurse stepped out. "She's stable," she said kindly. "No signs of injury, malnourished, but no illness we can't manage. She's quiet, very quiet." "Thank you," I whispered. I sat back down. I didn't move again until dawn broke pale through the glass doors. I heard her heels before I saw her. Click, click, click. Deliberate, tall, unapologetic. Danielle walked into the clinic lobby like a woman who belonged anywhere she chose to be. Her coat clung to her shoulders like armor. Her curls were pulled back, not a strand out of place. She looked at me, then past me, through the small window into the pediatric recovery room. Nova lay there, wrapped in white, her arms crossed like she wasn't used to softness, her eyes open but empty. Danielle didn't speak at first. She just stood there, frozen, staring. "She's the one I told you about," I said. "She was under a bridge," I added. "Alone. They called her cursed, a witch, just a kid eating out of garbage cans." Danielle's lips pressed into a thin, unreadable line. I reached for her hand. She didn't pull away, but she didn't squeeze back either. "We prayed for a child for 12 years, I said. "Maybe God answered us, just not the way we expected." Danielle finally turned toward me. The look in her eyes, God, I'll never forget it. Not anger, not rejection, but fear. Fear of hope, fear of believing again. That night, Nova came home. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply clutched a donated stuffed animal in one hand and looked around our mansion like she'd stepped into a dream she couldn't afford to trust. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, a sweeping staircase that split in 2 directions like a castle from a fairy tale. Nova's voice was barely audible. "Is this a palace?" Danielle knelt beside her and smiled, for the first time in weeks. "No, sweetheart," she said. "It's your home." And in that moment, something broke open in me. A light I hadn't felt in years poured into my chest. The days that followed weren't perfect. Nova was quiet, suspicious. She flinched when anyone raised their voice. She stuffed extra food into her pockets like she wasn't sure it would be there later. She slept with the light on. She apologized too much. But slowly, inch by inch, she unfurled. She colored. She painted. She drew little sketches of birds and trees and stars. One day, Danielle found a picture taped to the fridge. It was the 3 of us. Stick figures, yes, but her handwriting underneath made my throat tighten. My new family. Danielle left the room that morning without a word, but I saw her wiping her eyes as she turned the corner. We enrolled Nova at Linwood Academy the following week. The headmaster raised an eyebrow when we walked in, a black man with a reputation, accompanied by a small, silent girl with second-hand shoes and a past no one wanted to ask about. But Nova aced the placement tests, silently, completely. She wrote her essay in 10 minutes. The teacher wept reading it. "She's brilliant," they said. I already knew. 3 months passed, then 6, then a year. Nova blossomed. She called me Dad. She called Danielle Mom. And for a while, for the first time in a very long time, our house was full of laughter. We had found something we didn't even realize we were still looking for. But the past wasn't done with me. And what I didn't know, what would soon unravel everything, was that this little girl under my roof, this daughter I thought I'd rescued, was mine. By blood, by history, by a truth I'd buried so deep it came back like a ghost. Miracles have a strange way of arriving. Not when you ask for them, not even when you need them. They come when you've already made peace with the silence. It was a Tuesday morning, ordinary, until it wasn't. Danielle walked out of the master bathroom, barefoot, still in her robe. Her face was pale, unreadable. In her hand was a small plastic stick. I looked up from my coffee, distracted. "Everything okay?" She didn't answer. Instead, she laughed. It was a broken, almost disbelieving sound. Half joy, half terror, and then she held the test out like it burned her. 2 pink lines, positive, pregnant. I dropped the mug. "I didn't believe it either," she said, her voice shaking. I took 5 more. Every single one. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. For 12 years we begged, pleaded, paid doctors, pricked skin, counted hormone drops in the dark. For 12 years, we buried dreams every month like clockwork. And now, without warning, without science, without strategy, she was pregnant. I pulled her into my arms, and for the first time in years, she sobbed without hiding it. "Nova," she whispered. "Nova changed everything," I nodded. But something cold stirred at the back of my mind. Something I didn't understand yet. We named the baby Grace. When she was born 9 months later, the world celebrated with us. Black Enterprise ran a headline, "Carrington's welcome baby after 12 years of struggle." I donated $5 million to Atlantis Children's Hospital. We threw a naming ceremony so big it blocked traffic for 6 blocks. But there was one moment no one saw, except those in the front row. I held Nova in my arms, not Grace, and I said into the mic, "This girl is not a witch. She is not cursed. She is our blessing." Because the moment she walked into our home, God answered. Danielle clapped, smiled, kissed my cheek. The crowd roared. But in that moment, I felt something shift in Nova's body. Just the slightest stiffness, like she didn't know how to hold that much love without flinching. The years passed fast after Grace arrived. Nova didn't just thrive, she soared. Top of her class at Linwood, robotics team, coding summer programs, national recognition. By 16, she had already built software for rural school children to access education offline using solar-powered tablets. She made the news. She made us proud. But something was happening inside me. Something I didn't tell anyone. It started small. A laugh. A turn of phrase. The way Nova lined up her pens before homework. Black, blue, red, green. She had my hands. Not similar, mine. Same curve of the knuckles, same small scar above the wrist. The one I got falling off a bike at 10. One night, I found one of her essays on the kitchen counter. I picked it up, expecting teenage angst. Instead, I saw my own writing. Not the words, the handwriting. Same slant, same pressure. Same loops in the lowercase g. I dropped it like it had burned me. Tobias came over one Sunday afternoon, my oldest friend, godfather to Grace. We were in the backyard, drinking palm wine like we used to when we were nobodies with dreams. He watched Nova from a distance as she helped Grace with sidewalk chalk, then he leaned in. "You ever wonder why she acts so much like you?" I froze. "What do you mean?" "I mean the way she talks, her focus, her posture, her need to solve things instead of feel them. Even the way she walks into a room like like she's measuring it. That's you, bro. I forced a laugh. She's my daughter. That's what happens. He raised an eyebrow. She's your adopted daughter. Silence. Then he said it. Get a DNA test. I stood. Toby, just clear your head, Malik, that's all. No one has to know, but I did know. Not the truth, not yet. But something deep in my bones had already started unraveling. That night, after the house had gone still, I walked into Nova's room. She was asleep, her curls wild on the pillow, her lips slightly parted. I stared at her for a long time. Then I walked into the bathroom, opened the cabinet, and took her hairbrush. The next morning, I delivered the sample to a private lab under a fake name. Paid in cash, no questions. Danielle didn't know. Nova didn't know. But something inside me already did. And I wasn't ready for what it would confirm. They called while I was in the back of my car, idling in the driveway. The house was quiet. The sun was setting behind the oaks, spilling gold across the Carrington estate, like the world had no idea it was about to end. I picked up on the second ring. Mr. Carrington, the voice said, you might want to sit down. I'm listening, I said, though my chest had already gone hollow. There's no doubt. The match is perfect. Nova Ellis is your biological daughter. 99.99% probability. Silence. I didn't breathe, didn't blink. The air inside the car vanished. My hand trembled so badly the phone nearly slipped from my grip. I stared through the windshield at the familiar, serene landscape of my own front lawn, and it felt like I was sinking beneath it. Nova is my daughter, mine, by blood, by history, by a night I barely remembered, a girl named Adana Ellis, a college party, a fog of too much Hennessy and not enough honesty. Had a daughter for 16 years and never knew. God help me. I didn't tell Danielle, not that night, not the next. I told myself I needed time to gather the right words, the right moment, the right explanation that wouldn't sound like betrayal, even though, deep down, I knew it was. I called Nova instead. Can you meet me, I asked, voice tight. Of course, Daddy. Everything okay? No, I whispered, but I need you to hear it from me. We met at a little soul food diner off Peachtree Street. She walked in wearing her university jacket, fresh braids tied back, face bright. She looked more like a woman now than a child. There was light in her, and I was about to dim it. What's wrong? She asked, sliding into the booth. I stared at her for a long moment. What was your mother's name? She blinked. Adana? Adana Ellis. She studied English Lit at Howard before transferring to Georgia State. She told me once she knew someone named Malik, a boy she loved, but he never knew about me. My stomach dropped. I looked away. Everything I'd buried began clawing its way up. Nova, I said, my voice thick. I didn't know. I swear to you, I never knew, not until this week. But you're not just my adopted daughter. You're mine. She stared at me, mouth open, eyes wide, then glassy. You're what? I reached across the table, hand trembling. You're my daughter. Her lips moved, but no sound came. She blinked like the world had gone sideways. Then she whispered, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I didn't know, I said. I didn't know for sure. She stood abruptly, eyes darting toward the door, like she couldn't breathe. I rose too, reaching for her. Nova, please, just give me time. I wanted to tell Danielle first. I didn't want to break her again. I didn't want to lose everything. She nodded slowly, but her eyes were filled with something I'd never seen in them before. Hurt, disbelief, a crack. She left quietly, didn't say goodbye, and I stood there alone, knowing I had just pulled a thread I couldn't unpull. 2 nights later, I came home late. The house was still, too still. Danielle was waiting at the top of the staircase, standing stiff in her satin robe. Her face was unreadable, but in her hand was the envelope. My stomach dropped. lied to me, she said quietly. I froze. My lungs stopped working. You had a child, she whispered, stepping down the stairs. A daughter. And you let me live in this house for 16 years, thinking she was an orphan, a stranger. While I wept through IVF, while I clutched negative pregnancy tests like coffins, you were raising your own daughter in front of me. I didn't know, I said quickly. I swear to you, I didn't know until last week. But you didn't tell me. I wanted to. I just... You asked her to keep it secret too? Danielle hissed. You involved our daughter in your lie? I reached for her. She pulled away. I gave you everything, she cried. My loyalty, my youth, my body. And you hid this from me? I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did. Her voice was shaking now, her hands clenched at her sides. I can't do this, she said finally. I can't look at her. Not right now, not knowing she's yours. She walked past me, up the stairs. The door slammed so hard the chandelier trembled, and I stood in the foyer, alone again. Nova was mine, and I'd never felt more powerless in my life. The next morning, the house was too quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes with sleep or peace or a well-lived night. This quiet was hollow. It was the silence of something missing, the silence of absence. I stepped into the hallway, my shirt still wrinkled from where I'd collapsed in the guest room chair. I hadn't slept, not really. My body might have shut down for a few hours, but my mind was bleeding. I walked past Grace's nursery. She was cooing in her crib, her nanny gently humming. But Nova's door was wide open, too wide. The bed was made, sheets untouched. Her school ID lay on the desk. Her backpack was gone, but her favorite hoodie, the one she wore almost every day, was draped over the chair like it had been forgotten mid-thought. I stepped back, heart pounding. Nova, I called, louder this time. No answer. I called her phone. It rang once, then voicemail. I tried again, straight to voicemail. Panic surged like ice in my veins. I stormed down the staircase 2 at a time, nearly slipping. Where's Nova? I barked at the housekeeper standing near the kitchen. She froze. Sir, what happened? She's gone. I stepped forward. What do you mean, gone? Madame Danielle told her to leave, she stammered, eyes wide. Said she was no longer welcome in this house. Everything in me went still, like the world had stopped breathing. I walked into Danielle's private lounge without knocking. She sat calmly, teacup in hand, a newspaper folded beside her. She didn't even flinch when I entered. You sent her away? I asked, voice low and cracking. She had no place here anymore. You had no right. I had every right, she snapped. You want to raise your child with another woman, do it, but not under my roof. She's a child, Danielle. She's your child, she said coldly. Not ours. I took a step closer, desperate. She's been ours for years, before we even knew. She calls you mom. She's a reminder, Danielle said, her voice sharp now, hands trembling. Of every night I cried alone. Of every time I looked in the mirror and wondered what was wrong with me. And all along, you had her, your blood, your answer. She didn't ask for this, I whispered. She didn't choose to be born in silence. Neither did I, she snapped, and now she's gone. Tears stung my eyes. My hands shook. You broke her, I said. You threw her back into the same world I rescued her from. She'll survive, Danielle muttered, standing up. She did before, but she won't trust again, I said, and that's on us. I turned and left, slamming the door behind me. I drove without thinking. I must have passed 100 traffic lights without registering a single one. The rain had returned, like it always did when pain hit hardest. The same Atlanta rain that had soaked Nova the first night I found her under the bridge, now poured over my windshield, blurring the city into a smear of red lights and regret. I called her again. Still off. I called every friend she had, every contact from her school. Nothing. The last place I could think of was the cheap motel district on the southern edge of town, where the desperate went when they had nowhere else. I was halfway there when the truck hit me. I didn't even see it coming. One moment I was gripping the wheel, heart pounding in my throat. The next, blinding headlights, screeching tires, a scream that wasn't mine but felt like it came from my soul. Metal twisted, glass shattered, everything went black. I don't remember the ambulance. I don't remember the surgery. All I remember is opening my eyes to white lights and beeping machines, and a voice whispering, "He's awake." I blinked through the haze. My head was pounding, ribs felt cracked, and there she was. Nova, standing in the doorway of my hospital room, her eyes red, her hands trembling. "Daddy," she said, voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." "No," I croaked. "You did nothing wrong." She ran to me, gripping my hand like she was afraid I'd disappear. "I left because I didn't want to break your family," she cried. "I didn't want to be the reason she hated you." "You didn't break us," I whispered. "Secrets did." The door creaked open again. Danielle. She stood there, Grace in her arms, her face unreadable. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then, slowly, she walked forward. She set Grace down in a nearby chair and looked at Nova. "I was angry," she said quietly. "I still am, but I shouldn't have sent you away." Nova didn't speak. Danielle reached out. "You're not the problem," she said. "You're not the enemy. I was just hurt." Nova's lips trembled. She nodded, and for the first time, Danielle took her hand, not with a smile, not with certainty, but with intention. "Come home," she said softly. Tears streamed down Nova's face. And mine. Maybe we weren't healed. Maybe we never would be. But for the first time since that bridge, we were finally moving forward. Together. There is a difference between being whole and being healed. Some wounds never close the way they used to be. They leave edges jagged and pink. But sometimes it's in those broken places that the light finally gets in. Nova came home 2 days after the hospital. She stepped out of the car slowly, fingers clenched tightly around Danielle's hand. Grace was asleep in the back seat, head resting against Nova's shoulder. The same maids who once whispered that Nova was cursed now stood at the top of the stairs, silent. No glares, no fear, only bowed heads, only respect. The house didn't feel like a mansion that day. It felt like what it should have always been. Theirs too. Nova paused under the marble archway, looking up at the tall white pillars, the grand chandelier overhead. I watched from the front door, arm in a sling, bruised ribs aching with every breath. She looked at me. I smiled. She walked inside. Her room was untouched. Danielle had made sure of it. Her drawings were still taped to the wall, her laptop still on the desk. Even her worn-out copy of To Kill a Mockingbird still rested by the window. She didn't say much that night. Neither did I, but as I sat at the dinner table, arm cradled in bandages, I heard her laughter for the first time since the truth came out. Grace reached across the table and grabbed Nova's hand. "I missed you," she said softly. Nova smiled, her fingers squeezing back. That was all I needed. Later that night, Danielle knocked on Nova's door, holding a brown envelope. Her voice was calm, but her eyes held something fragile, like she was stepping out onto ice she didn't trust yet. "I think you should see this," she said. Nova opened it gently. Inside were photographs, old, faded. One showed a young woman with glowing skin and natural curls, wearing a university t-shirt and laughing into the camera. My breath caught in my chest. Adana. Nova's mother. My past. And in the next photo, one I had never seen before. I was in it too, arms slung over her shoulders, both of us smiling. mid-laugh. "She never told me about you," Nova whispered. "She may not have known," Danielle said gently. "Or maybe she chose to raise you without help. Either way, you're here now." Nova nodded slowly, holding the photo like it was proof she wasn't a myth. "I don't expect us to be perfect," Danielle said, sitting beside her. "But I want to try." Nova looked up at her. "Me too." Danielle leaned in and hugged her. Not like a woman replacing a mother, but like one learning to rebuild from the ground up. 3 years later, I stood in the front row of a packed auditorium in New York City. My ribs no longer hurt, but my heart still clenched as I watched her step onto that stage. She didn't wear makeup, didn't hide behind power suits, just a fitted sky pool dress, her natural curls pinned back, and a confidence no mirror could measure. The screen behind her read, "Hope in Code, How One Girl's Software is Changing Rural Education." She smiled. 5 years ago, that smile didn't exist. Now, it lit up a room of 2,000. Nova cleared her throat. "I used to sleep under a bridge in Atlanta," she said calmly. "People told me I was cursed, that I was the reason bad things happened, that I didn't deserve to be loved." A quiet ripple went through the audience. "But one man stopped," she continued, her voice firm. "He didn't see a witch. He didn't see a mistake. He saw me." She glanced toward us. I stood beside Danielle, who was holding Grace's hand. Tears were already in my eyes. That man gave me shelter. He gave me warmth. He gave me a name. And through that love, I found something bigger than safety. She clicked the remote. A projection of her software platform appeared behind her. Sleek, minimal, beautiful. I found purpose. Nova's system was already being used in schools across 6 states and 3 African nations. Solar-powered tablets, offline accessibility, AI-enhanced lesson plans for kids with no Wi-Fi, no power, no voice. And if I can say one thing to every kid who is thrown away, Nova said, her voice cracking, it's this: you are not forgotten. You are not cursed. You are a blessing, just like me. The audience rose to their feet, a standing ovation, thunderous applause, reporters shouting her name, but Nova didn't look at the lights. She looked at us. She ran down the steps, walked past cameras, and into our arms. I held her so tight I thought my heart might split open. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding me," and I held her closer. "You were never lost," I said. That night, as we walked back to the hotel, Danielle reached for my hand. Her grip was firm, fingers threaded through mine. "We almost lost her," she said. "I almost lost both of you," I replied. "But we didn't," she whispered. "No, we didn't. And maybe that's what redemption looks like. Not erasing the past, but choosing to walk through it together. Bruised, but still breathing. Still here. Still a family. Always."